everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we are doing a video that is a masterclass on window treatments. Everything you need to know about blinds, curtains, anything that you're putting on your windows, we're going to cover it. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome back to our channel. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Brett. Brett is one of my lead designers. He's one of my right-hand men. You've been by my side for 9 years now.
9 years, yes, 9 years.
And Brett is the mastermind of window treatments. Well, beyond just window treatments, he's the head of FF&E, and so today he's very kindly joined us to talk to us all things about window treatments, curtains, blinds, how to get the very best of your window treatments. So I'm excited.
Wow, I want to meet this guy.
But first, a quick thank you to today's video sponsor, Pure. The Evoke Play is a music system for life, whether that's information, entertainment or music. You can get a multitude of sources of music, whether it's your favourite breakfast radio station, your favourite Spotify list, digital radio, FM radio. I've been really impressed by how user-friendly this machine is. I'm a real technophobe, but it's been so straightforward to use. And I love the design with the white surround and the wall front. This is eco-certified and recycled walls, so it's very sustainable. But I also think it's really classic design and very versatile, so it would look good in almost any interior. I love it in my kitchen, but equally I think it would look great in a bedroom or a living room or even a bathroom. It's super light, and I just think the design is really understated, and the sound quality is amazing too. The popular Evoke range from Pure, with their sleek and stylish design, make them perfect for every home, with contemporary designs that will subtly stand out and fill each space with high quality sound. A lot of the questions we get asked about is how do we get our curtains to look so perfect? Can we talk about curtains and the different types of headings first? Because that's quite important in determining the type of curtains that you end up with.
Yeah.
I personally love the ones that hang really straight, look like they're terrified and have never been touched. How do we get those?
And I think that's what everyone strives for, don't they?
Yeah.
They just want the perfect curtain. There are a lot of options actually out there. We recently had like a in-house talk discussion about the options that are available. You've got ones that spring into mind. You have a wave header curtain. So that's the perfectly waved curtain that just sits on the neat rack.
That's our favourite as well, isn't it?
It is. It's just very neat. It always just looks nice.
And we'll share some images with you guys of different examples. We've done that in our projects. And I always get confused with the names. I know what I like. And even though I've been doing this for 15, however many years, I can never remember the names. But it's quite similar to the cartridge heading as well, isn't it?
It is. It's very similar. And also as well, it's regional and all the different terminology changes in different countries. So we've listed today some names for the ones that's on the screen behind us, but there are lots of different names for these, so we'll keep it simple. So you've got the triple pinch pleat. Yeah. So that's it's just 3 pinches of fabric that are really neatly clasped together. And then also you can do that as a double. That's another option. And then also we've already mentioned the wave header. And then also you've got the Euro pleat. So the Euro pleat is the one that it's kind of pleated up towards the pole. It's a really neat look.
Yeah, I love that. To me it looks very like Belgium interior. It's really classy and I would like to use that. I think Turner Pocock uses that heading quite a lot and I love their work.
We're going to be using that then, aren't we? It looks fantastic. It's a really neat pleat. And then the last one, it's inverted pleat. Inverted pleat, yeah. I do like this one. It reminds me a bit of your headmistress's dress, you know, when you're at school with the pleats.
Oh, that's bad connotations for me.
But it's like pleats, and they're quite sandwiched at the top. They're neatly sewn together, and what that means is you can put them in curtain pockets that have reduced depth. So when the curtains and the shears sit together, they don't rub past each other too much. That's a really good one for that. Yeah,
that's good to know, because that, especially in new builds, we quite often find if they've done a curtain pocket, and we'll share with you on screen if you're not familiar with what a curtain pocket is, it's basically where the curtains go up into the ceiling, and quite often you'll have a cornice that acts almost like the pelmet. and it just looks really contemporary, and the curtains sort of disappear into the ceiling. But often we find in new builds, or when we're not involved from the very beginning, they will only allow sort of, you know, 15, 20 centimetres, and that's really not enough. We need, is it 30?
30, yeah.
If you're going to do a sheer and a curtain, you need 30 centimetres so that they don't rub against each other.
That is indeed correct. We've gone down to 25 before, but again, we've had to like tweak the sheer heading on the curtain. But it depends on like your lateral floor space that you've got, because you really need to get in there early and consider your curtain pockets, because it affects your furniture layout. 30 centimetres, as much as it's wonderful, it is in a smaller room.
Yeah, that takes
that's
quite a
lot.
chunk.
That's almost like a bedside table. So you just got to get in there early and really consider these, like Sophie said, especially in new build properties.
Yeah, so what would you do if someone's got a small room, like a small bedroom, they don't have 30 centimetres to give up to curtains? What can they do if they still want to have a sheer and a curtain?
Consider the headings. So it sounds like you'll definitely need to adjust the sheer heading to maybe the
inverted pleat?
That one. And then maybe we like to do the cartridge pleat, but what you could perhaps do is don't go for a very full curtain. Because another little tip as well, you actually, when you're doing curtains, you need 2.5 times the window width to get a full curtain. You can maybe reduce that down to twice rather than 250, and that will maybe give you a bit more space between the windows.
Okay.
But you're still really going to have that depth there.
I guess the good thing about going 2.5, obviously it means you've got to use more fabric, it's more expensive, but it makes your curtains look more luxurious, doesn't it?
It does, it really does. And then also you've got the other factor is dress curtains.
Yeah.
So dress curtains as well, people think that you actually don't need to draw a dress curtain. You kind of do. You need to give the idea that you can draw them. I had to get some advice from our curtain company on this one, but they suggested 1.5 times the window width, and that gives you a much smaller stack. But you can also still draw them. They just look a little sparse when they're drawn.
Oh, they still fully draw?
Yeah, they can still draw.
Interesting to know. I didn't know they did that.
That's your boundaries really, is 1.5, and you've got up to 2.5. But really you do want to stick towards the 2.5 if you can.
So we're calling them dress curtains, but they're working curtains.
They're still
just working curtains on a diet.
Yeah, a good diet. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about types of fabrics, because fabric is so important when it comes to the success of your curtains. You can get the right pleat, you can get the great curtain maker. If you choose the wrong fabric, it can go disastrously wrong. You can get those really puffy sort of prom dress curtains that we all hate. Yeah. I personally hate a fabric that looks really shiny and synthetic.
Yes, especially 10 years ago, there was a lot of that, wasn't
it? It was
that glamour, sheen, everything was shining. We're more rustic and
and it's all about the type of shine as well. Like if it's a real silk, lovely. If it's a wool silk, lovely. But if it's that synthetic, looks like it might go up in a plane. Not so much.
The perfect mix, isn't it, is the wool silk mix.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
The wool, you get the softness of the wool, and then this really subtle sheen from the silk. It's just a really nice luxurious look, and the curtain companies love working with it. It's very easy to steam, sew with and pleat. Yeah,
and it doesn't crease easily. And I'd say like one of the tips that I use when I'm picking fabrics, and the fabric companies never tell you this, but I've kind of learnt it along the way. They all laugh at me because I do my own fabric testing, which generally involves putting diamonds on it, which apparently is a real rich girl problem. But I do that to see if they catch easily, because that's really annoying. If your curtains have got people brushing past them and they easily catch and they pull threads, that's something you want to be aware of. But also, if you're worried about creases and you want a fabric that hangs really neatly and nicely, scrunch up your fabric sample and then let go and see how much it holds onto those creases. And that's what will happen in real life when they're curtains. And do you know what, I'm feeling the need to have a little confession here, because I do need to do a little disclaimer on this video, because the amount of times I've been asked on Instagram when they're seeing our professional shots of the rooms and the curtains are literally like razor sharp, you know, perfect pleats, you could literally take a ruler down it, and people are like, how do you get it that neat? I do need to confess, sometimes if there's a piece of furniture, don't want to shatter the illusion, but there might be one of us holding the curtain at the bottom, and that's not because we haven't made them properly, but fabric will always spring up a little bit. So, you know, all these tips, even with the best one in the world, the best curtain maker, the best fabric, it really, you know, you're working with a natural material. You can't, it's not like it's made of cardboard. You've got to expect it to hang with a little bit of movement. But I'd say don't worry about that too much, because we analyse and you guys analyse our photos so much, but in real life, when you're actually in that room, it doesn't matter if the curtain's not perfectly straight, does it?
And often as well, when we're shooting, it might be blowing a gale outside and the photographer insists on having the doors open.
Yes, he does.
And we
but at the same time, perfectly
curtain.
straight curtain. A lot of our fabrics that look like linen that we've done with Andrew Martin are that composition of mostly viscose with some linen. This actually is one of our fabrics that we've used from the Andrew Martin collection, and we use that. What's it called?
Brindisi, isn't it?
Brindisi, yeah, it could be Brindisi.
Brindisi.
I am terrible with names. I can't remember the names of any of my products. I just call them whatever I want. But we used that in an incredible project. That was one of my favourite interiors, that living room in the South Kensington project.
That was a serious ladder for those curtains, wasn't it?
It was immense. And I think that's the thing as well. When you've got a beautiful room like that, and we'll share that one with you guys, you can really just chuck a beanbag in there. It's going to look good. And it's with your curtains, the more height you've got, the better your curtains are going to look. So that looks really dramatic and elevated.
That was actually one of your questions that somebody asked, is what height do you go for your curtain? And it's always go as high as possible, because you get to appreciate the fabric even more.
100%.
And it elongates the ceiling height.
Yeah, and also by going higher, it gives the illusion that your windows are higher as well. So it's an overall all-win. But I'll share in the description box some of the best fabrics from not only the Woodland collection, but some of my previous collections with Andrew Martin that are particularly good for window treatments. Yeah. And I'm really favouring a subtle pattern as well. I think that's another trend that's coming through.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Yeah, and people are quite scared of that, because they think, oh, is it going to look too busy? And it's kind of hard to predict once you've got the pleats, how's the pattern going to look? But we can share some examples with you guys on screen as well of where we've done that, and it's been really successful, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, and I think that's not something that we're doing just in our studio. That's something we're seeing across the board with all the top designers.
The windows as well, and the projects that we work on, the windows they're so big and so vast. It's another wall that you've lost. So you
100%.
want to add so much interest, but also softness to the room. You want to take that echo out and add that luxury.
Yeah, and one thing I always say, like when you're looking at a mood board, is the patterns and the colours really stand out to you. They seem really dramatic, but once they're dispersed in a room, and the more pattern you lay into a room, it almost becomes a neutral, and it almost just becomes like a textured fabric rather than really noticing all that pattern. So don't be scared, be brave when it comes to pattern is my advice. So talking about the reasons of why you wouldn't use curtains, are there like specific room types that blinds sort of lend themselves more to?
I think behind is a really good example here. It's like a boys' room. Curtains can look a little bit fussy, a bit ball gowny if there's too much. But this one worked really well in here. You like to use the word preppy.
I do.
So we went for quite a rustic linen mix blind here, but also we had a leather weave trim. So there's a lot of interest within just these little blinds. So that's another reason. It depends on the room's usage as well, who it's for.
So let's talk about trims. Trims, for those of you that don't know, are basically a decorative, almost like ribbon that we'll put down the leading edge of the curtains, or like we've done on this blind here, we might put it down both the sides, we might put it on the bottom as well. And it's really just a way of sort of elevating the blinds or the curtains, adding a little bit more detail, a little bit more luxury. We tend to use a lot of Salmon and Sons trims. We have some trims with Andrew Martin with our old collection as well. But talk to me about your favourite trims, like any particular tips that you'd suggest?
That I would suggest. I would say don't put the trim too far in from the edge, because it can make your blind look narrower. So try and keep the trim on the outside edges as much as possible of the blind. It makes you don't lose the window width. You've still got the width there. Also, when somebody's making it, just show them a concept image of how maybe the trim's going to meet at the bottom. Do you want like a neat mitre, or do you want it to go straight to the bottom? Some people might not understand that, so it might.
And it's an
really
expensive material, isn't it? So you don't want your curtain maker to make mistakes. I've got a couple of tips when it comes to room blinds. When you're using trim, sometimes we love to use really sort of like heavily textured, very thick trims. You can really only use those on curtains, because you've got to think with your Roman blinds, it's got to fold very neatly. If you get a very chunky trim, it's going to make that fold expand a little bit, and it's not going to fold so neatly.
That's correct.
And then the other thing I would say is, like we just touched on, these trims are quite expensive, so we try not to use them too abundantly.
No.
She says, with like trim all over her project. But my one tip is, if you'd love to use trim and you don't necessarily want to blow the budget, you could just do it along the bottom of the blind, and that looks really effective as well. And you're going to need a fraction of what you would need if you went down the whole length of the blind. So don't feel like it's not an option for you. You just need to think about different ways of using it.
That's true. Also brush fringe as well at the
I
bottom,
love a brush
behind
fringe.
a Roman blind.
Yes.
It helps with the light bleed as well.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so that can look quite effective.
You don't want it coming out the sides though, it could look like a hairy little bit.
It's true. The other thing is, if I go on the opposite end of the spectrum and you want that even more elevated look, you can have embroidery down the side of a window treatment. We'll be able to show some slides of some machinery that can actually do that. We've done some like chain links before.
Yeah, let's get those up on the screen.
And yeah, so you can. It's just endless. A canvas is a blank. A curtain is a blank canvas.
It is. It is.
But
it really
can be
is.
a piece of art.
You can take it to the very sort of like nth level, or you can scale it back. And whilst we're talking about how to sort of elevate your curtains, let's talk about linings, because I think that's something that's really overlooked, isn't it?
There is. There's a lot to it, but also the more levels that you have behind a curtain or a window treatment, it does cost more, but it is beneficial to have an interliner. It gives you the thickness that you want behind that material, and then you can maybe have a thermal lining, so that's if your windows have drafts and things like that. That's really helpful.
Good for the environment.
Very good. And then there's also your blackout lining, so that is the reverse of the window treatment, but equally that's really important when that's being specified, to make sure that it's washable, or if any damp or anything goes on the back of it, that it doesn't shrink and pull, because it can affect the face of the curtain as well.
And is that just specifically to blackout lining that it tends to be a little bit vulnerable?
It's actually any lining. You just really need to be looking at the care guide when you're specifying that.
Yeah. One of the things I love to do when it comes to linings, because I love to spend people's money, is I love to do a fabric on the front and the back, because I think, especially if it's like a ground level room, like, you know, say you've got French doors opening onto the garden, often you're seeing the back of those curtains as much as you're seeing the front, and it's a really lovely detail, isn't it, to see. Obviously you don't have to go as, you know, luxurious on the inside fabric, but maybe, you know, the Andrew Martin fabrics are quite affordable. You could do a nice subtle pattern. I think that's just such a nice touch.
Such a nice touch, especially like on huge double glazed doors. It's just as important as when you've got the room boundaries inside and out. And the other thing as well, if you don't have that budget to go absolutely crazy with the back,
the voice of reason.
You can, rather than your standard like cream lining that's a bit yellow, if you've got a taupe fabric on the back, go for a taupe plain lining on the back. You know, there's some okay options that are there. If you've got a grey front, go for a grey back. Yeah. And it's all the same price.
Yeah, that's great to have. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. So on screen right now, we've got an example of embroidery, Brett. What's the advantages of doing this over doing trim?
I would say material-wise, it's cheaper to not have to buy the trim. So on that aspect, it's cheaper that you're not purchasing that. But the other side of it, that you've then got to appoint your curtain maker to then set up a special machine that did this. So you're probably paying for time. For this to be monitored. So it's probably...
Cost-wise, no benefit.
No.
But I guess like the reason why we've done it in the past is that you have the option to make something completely custom for your client. And if you say, for example, you're doing Roman blinds and the fabric that you really want to use doesn't lend itself to trim, because it needs to be quite a heavy fabric, doesn't it? You've got the option of embroidering that fabric because the embroidery isn't heavy. So there are a few advantages. We tend to use trim, don't we? Because I think just the level of detail you can get with trim is more than what you can get from embroidery.
You can get like velvet mix, silks, beads, all sorts now, can't you? Trims have come a long way.
Yeah, as you're saying this, I think when we finish filming in this meeting room, we're going upstairs. So upstairs is our design studio, and we'll show you our basket of tricks. We've got a whole wall of samples. We'll have to have a little tidy up, I think. Quick tidy up. So one of the things I want to talk about whilst we're talking about window treatments is a really serious consideration, and that is child safety. Because if you have sort of curtain strings or the cord for your blinds, and that hangs down at a height where your child can maybe climb on a chair and put their head through it, you would think that's probably really unlikely and a child wouldn't do that, but sadly there's hundreds of cases, if not thousands, where children have died by doing that. So There's a few things that you can do, and I'm by no means, you know, the health and safety guru here, so definitely check it out. It will change from country to country, but just make sure you're aware of this and spread the message. Anyone you know that's putting in blinds, even if you don't have children, it could just be that someone's visiting your home that does have children. You do not want this to happen. It's so avoidable. So we've talked about curtains, we've talked about Roman blinds. The third type of window treatment that I really want to touch on is shears.
Yes.
They come in two forms, don't they? Sheer curtains and sheer blinds.
They do.
Why do we use shears?
Why do we use shears? Well, firstly, they've come a long way. It used to be net curtains and things like these awful materials. But yeah, they've come a long way. So now shears, firstly, they soften a window. They give you a bit of privacy too. So this example here, we've got sheer Roman blinds outside. It was a busy view, and we wanted to distort that and not, you know, it's a bathroom.
It's a bathroom. They don't need to flash their neighbours.
No, so we don't like flashing, and you know, you don't always want to see outside too. So that really helps. And I think something to consider when we do shears or specifying shears is it's always really good to go for something that's an extra wide width as well. We like to go for something like 320 centimetres wide or more. It just means that you have less seams in awkward places, and it just looks a bit more flawless by doing that. Yeah,
and the other thing we tend to do with shears throughout a project is we try, if possible, to use the same sheer fabric. If you're going to see the elevation of the entire building, and there's going to be different shears on each window, it can look a little bit messy. So some clients like that, some don't. It really gets led by the client. It is fun to mix up the shears, like if you've got a boys' room, you want to have a really funky, like chunky sheer. It can look a bit more playful rather than something like we've got on screen. But generally, I would say we use that same sheer fabric, and that's why we go for that extra wide width.
We do.
Even if you've got like a narrow sash window in the bathroom, and you think, oh, that's going to be a waste of fabric, that's excess fabric will be used on another window treatment, on another window. So it's also a bit more cost effective, I'd say, as well, doesn't it? It ends up being cheaper.
Less cuts, you've got the same fabric. Yeah, it's a good saving you can make there.
Definitely. We tend to go for Roman blinds, don't we, rather than rollers and shears. We used to use a lot more sheer rollers, and I had them in my house, and I changed them about 3 years ago. I feel like sheer rollers don't have that same level of luxury. It's something that doesn't have any detail on it, and your sheer, when it's down, you can't really see your window very much. You can if the light's pouring in from behind, but that's not going to happen throughout the whole day. And so just having a big plain panel can look quite boring. What I like about the sheer Romans is you get those nice little divisions, and it looks just a little bit more interesting and a little bit more luxurious, and I also think a bit more sophisticated. So I'm really happy that I changed it. We still sometimes use sheer rollers in a bathroom, but it's down to client preference. But I'd say if we're left to our own devices, we'll use sheer Romans. But I think one thing that's important to bear in mind with your sheer fabric, if you're choosing it, especially if you're choosing it for privacy purposes, is hold it up and see how much you can see of the view, because there's a sort of compromise to be made. I like to be able to see a little bit outside, because the whole point is you're still allowing the light to pour in during the day, you're not blocking out all the light. And it's nice to be able to see the view a little bit. But if you're relying on those for privacy, and you know you're getting changed in your bathroom on a daily basis, and all of a sudden one day you bump into a neighbour and they're like, well, thank you for the nighttime show, that could be quite embarrassing. So really think about that, and you'll need to get a bigger sample of your sheer to really be able to test that. You know, quite often the samples are like sort of 10 centimetres or 15 centimetres. That's not going to do what you need. But you might be able to get hold of a returnable sample, hold it up, get one of your family members to hold it up at night and have a look outside. You know, these don't give you privacy at night time, because you'll be able to see your silhouette. It's just privacy during the day, so disclaimer. So when we decided we were going to do this video and we were going to go full-blown masterclass on window treatments, we also reached out to our followers on Instagram and asked them what questions they had that they wanted to know about. So we're going to do a few of your questions that you've asked, the most popular ones, the ones that we haven't already covered right now. So Zara Khan 17 asked us how to dress a window in a small room.
Behind us is a perfect example of that. In a small room, you want to keep fabric off the floor, because you just don't want to, again, take away from that floor space. So a Roman blind, for example, worked really well here. And then also the window was really small, so we actually wanted to make the window look much taller. So another tip you can do is go as high as you want. There's not a written rule of what height to go above your window, but it can look a bit weird if you start to count the panes in the window and it doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
So example behind, I think we went about 20 centimetres above the window, and then
And it looks so much better, doesn't it?
It does.
That's such a good example of the power of a good window treatment. Especially because that wasn't initially going to have a window treatment, was it?
No.
It was a guest loo. So what you're seeing on the left, that's a site visit photo, and then on the right, that's the professional photo. But it did make a big difference having that.
It did.
I mean, I don't understand why people don't have window treatments in a loo. It's just
it
causes so much anxiety.
I mean,
Are people watching me or are they
who's that
not?
confident?
Yeah. No one needs to see that. That's that one thing.
Yeah.
So Rosemary Martin has asked, do Roman blinds go inside the recess or outside the recess?
It's a good question. It's nice to have options, but it's always best if you can to go outside the recess. The reason for, you never really want to block out any light. If you've got the option of light coming in, always go above the window. Again, we touched on the last question, it makes your window bigger by going outside of the recess. But sometimes you can't avoid that, you have to go in. Just maybe when you're curtain maker or blind maker, just do reduced pleats. So when it's all drawn up, the pleats are really, really small, so you're not blocking out much light.
That's a good tip, because you also need to think about, you always want to have at least one pleat hanging down so you can appreciate your nice fabric. When I see poor Roman blinds that are being strangled and they're like hoiked all the way up, it breaks my heart.
Yeah, it does.
Frisco Gesh asked, covering arch windows, have you got any advice?
Arch windows is a tricky one, isn't it?
It's a really tricky one.
Our curtain installers normally scratch their head and love us for this one, don't they? You do really, from our knowledge, have, I'd say, two options, wouldn't you? It's shutters. Shutters are great, they're lovely, they're quite costly, but also they do block out a lot of light.
Yeah.
And then secondly, we did hear some Roman blinds, and they look fantastic, and they really do soften the window. We did it here where we even dared and played around with the trim and went around the perimeter of it, which
that was
made
crazy. How did they manage to do that?
They're ruthless.
Is that actual trim, or is that a fabric that we've cut into a template?
I think it was a trim.
Wow.
I know. But
I don't know how we did that. It looks great. Yeah, really interesting. It does still block out a lot of natural light. There's no way of avoiding that, is there? You do have to block that arch. I mean, you could try and do some fancy swags and curtains, but I don't think that's really... No. I mean, in this scenario, this wouldn't work anyway, because you've got the slanted ceiling, so that really was our only option. Yeah. I think shutters is something I get asked a lot about. You'll never really see shutters in our projects, and it's because I don't like them.
Next.
And that's all. No is a full sentence, that's all you need to know. Holly MB 1991 asked, what do I do with patio doors in the kitchen? My window over the sink has a Roman blind. Brett, I believe you've got a great example of this.
I do, it's behind me. You know, yes, you can mix them up, it's absolutely fine. You want them to have a relationship with one another. Use the same fabric, it's just treated differently. It's just made for curtains or blinds. And I think it's a good example there, don't you think?
This is a great example, and I think the other way we've linked this visually is not only using the same fabric, but we've used the same trim but in a different way. So on the blind, it follows the perimeter of the blind, and on the curtains, it goes down the leading edge.
Yeah.
And it works really well, and it feels like it makes sense. I think curtains in a kitchen, in a similar way to curtains in a bathroom, we've got to be quite careful. You don't want to go too fussy. I certainly wouldn't do a pattern fabric in either of those rooms personally if I was doing curtains. I'd want to make them just as simple as possible and really just kind of disappear into the background. You can add some nice detail like the leather trim that we've added here, but I think if you added pattern onto that, it would become too dominant in that room, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a gorgeous space.
It is lovely. Well done, us. This is actually the kitchen from that project that I did the tour with Anthony last video. I don't think we did the kitchen. We had to pick just a few select rooms, so maybe we need a part 2. Let us know in the comments if you want a part 2. Get Anthony back. Maybe we should do a video with Brett and Anthony, my 2 lead designers.
I don't know if anyone's ready.
Is there room for that many egos? We'd be fighting for like a chance to talk, wouldn't we?
We would, yeah. We would.
But yeah, let us know. And also don't forget to drop comments in the description box of how much you love Brett, because Anthony has had a lot of love. It's actually making me feel a bit insecure. I think I need some love as well, because Anthony's ego is getting out of control.
I wasn't going to turn up.
It's a lot of pressure. Poor Brett. He's like, Anthony's had 2 videos. Everyone's loving Anthony. And then you have to have your first debut. So make sure you make Brett feel welcome, because I would like him to come back. I love doing this video with you.
Thanks, Sophie.
Did you love doing it with me?
I did. It's just, good. I can't wait for the comments.
Be nice.
Bring out the trolls.
So let's talk about complete blackout, because I know we can get complete blackout with curtains. We've already touched on that. You do the blackout lining. Sometimes you have to do a Roman blind. You still want blackout. And I've got this scenario in both my kids' rooms. I'll share an image of what that looks like. For the same reason that Brett mentioned, I didn't want to use curtains in my son's room because I didn't want it to feel, too girly. And I wanted to save floor space. And the same thing in my daughter's room. I wanted to have as much floor space as possible for, all her toys and dolls' houses and things. But one of the things that I've done in my house, and I kind of came up with this concept with Sam, our curtain maker, a few years ago, is you can use what is effectively a Velux blind, and it sits in a track down the inside of your window, and when that gets drawn, it gives you complete blackout. And you are going to thank me for this if you've got children, because your children are going to sleep like a dream. I'm not going to say sleep like a baby, because babies don't sleep well, but it gives you that total blackout. If, however, you are doing a new build from scratch, I would take that one step further, because the downside of that option is you do need to double that up with a sheer blind, because they don't look nice. The tracks, you see them go down your window. It's not the nicest looking, is it? Not a problem, because we have our sheer blinds permanently drawn down. But if you're doing a new build, you can now integrate them into your window frame, can't you?
You can. The architects at SPI love this one, don't they?
Yes.
You've got to integrate it within the ceiling. You have these cassettes put in there really early on, but they give you complete blackout.
Yeah, and it looks so sleek. Do we know any brands that we can share? I can't remember them off the top of my head.
We'll be able to share something.
Yeah, we're not gatekeeping, we just can't remember. But that's a good tip, and I think that's something that's important to know about blackout. It's something that certainly all of our clients always ask about, is how can I make this blackout? Don't worry if you've got to do Roman blinds, it's still an option. Yeah. This is Kinney Dougal asked this, how to make sure your sheer curtains look elegant, and I'm just going to add another point to that, and not look like granny neck curtains. How do you do that?
I need to take a deep breath after granny neck curtains. Again, you need someone really that's good at making sheer curtains. You want weights in the bottom. Weights really help you get them perfect pleats all the time, and then also when it's a windy day and things like that, it stops them blowing around like a ball gown if you need to.
Headings, would you say wave heading?
It's a neat look, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially if that's your only window treatment. You do want something that's got a nice, neat pleat at the top, not something that's scrunched, or you just, like a wave header, I would say is nice.
And I think the fabric selection really determines. I think, people used to use those real sort of lacy fabrics, and I think that's, if ever we get a client that sort of shirks when we say sheer curtains, I know that's what they're thinking, but you can get some really cool, like the Delaconia fabric. Do you remember that really like chunky textured one?
I do. Some really out there ones now, aren't there?
And I would say the more chunkier you go on your sheer, the more sort of contemporary it looks, doesn't it?
And also sometimes the less need for a curtain, the really chunkiness that you go, isn't it?
Yeah, like that project we did in Wentworth. Do you remember the kitchen? We can get that on screen. Yeah. That only had the sheer curtains, and that looked great. The client loved those.
It looked fantastic.
And do you remember the curtains we did in the Marylebone penthouse in the kitchen? We did a trim down those. They look great.
I know. Spoiler alert. The curtain guy after gave us feedback.
Yes.
And because we chose to do a trim on it too, down the base, it kind of made them kick out a little bit.
So maybe just on the leading edge would be better?
The leading edge would be better.
Okay, we're telling you all the truths here, not hiding. Okay, this is a really quick one. Beverly Ann XOXO has written, colour of curtain poles to match or contrast against your curtains.
Normally, SPI, don't we like to team up the ironmonger and the doors with the curtain poles. For example, we use a lot of bronze and antique brass. Yeah. So you'll see a lot of that on the portfolio, isn't it?
Yeah. But generally, I'd say we tend to go for bronze poles.
We do.
9 times out of 10.
We do.
Do you know, talking about wardrobe doors, I want to share just a few little sort of common mistakes that we see with window treatments, and one of the worst ones, is obviously functionality, is people don't plan with their wardrobe swings how that's going to clash with the sort of window treatments or the poles. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we kind of when we see it happen, or you'll go to like a show house or things like that, and it's a common mistake, unfortunately. But part of you dies inside when you see it. But it's people just don't consider the drop of the curtain with the door, and you really need to get in there early, and perhaps maybe have the curtain away from the door, for example, start it later, or have a double stack of curtains the other side, or go for a Roman blind in the recess.
Yeah.
There's lots of things you can do, but it's a crime that we see a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, and with the wardrobe door, if you've got a wardrobe door opening next to a window treatment, what you need to do is do a little filler panel so that it's not sort of opening straight onto that window treatment, because it's going to catch it and there's going to be a clash there. So you really got to think about these things at a planning point. If you don't have an interior designer and your curtains are right next to wardrobes or other pieces of furniture, just think that through. Another one we see a lot is radiators. If you've got curtains going over a radiator or a radiator cover, by the time they sort of fall over the radiator cover, it's going to be really pushing forward. So you'll need to bring your curtains forward so that like just skims across the front of it rather than being dragged forward like a tent.
Agreed.
Fiona K. Aff has said, what to do when you have an asymmetrical window or a very small gap one side? I'm just going to give you a really quick answer. We would do a single stack curtain on that situation. We've got a project in the Middle East right now. We just did a site visit, and in the dressing room there's a very small slither of wall next to the window. So we're doing one stack of curtains. We're doing the same approach in all the bathrooms as well. And actually I really like it when you do just one single stack. The only thing I would do in that scenario is then I would have a tie back, because it kind of makes sense, and you can have the curtain drawn slightly so it kind of goes a little bit in front of the window and then gets tied back. It looks really elegant, doesn't it?
And also as well, it gives you illusion to think that the window does possibly go behind the curtain as well, to make you think it is just a wider window too.
Yeah, we don't tend to use tie backs that much, and I really do love tie backs. I've got them in my living room.
Yeah, it really depends on if it's a dress curtain or not a dress curtain. If it's a dress curtain, when you have that tie back, you don't have much of the gather of your curtain come up off the floor. If you have fully working curtains that are, say, 2.5 times the window width, you've really got to pull them firstly, and then you also have this ball gown effect from the floor. You get quite a big gap.
Yeah.
So it can kind of go from a contemporary look to really quite classic quite quickly.
Yeah, it does.
But there's some fantastic tie backs, aren't there, with leather and braiding and
Sarko do some really nice ones, don't they?
Ones, really do.
And I would say if you have that ball gown type look with your curtains, and this is what happened in my living room, is I chose the fabric 12 years ago, and it did have a slubby. This is how we learnt the lesson, by the way. We learnt it in my house, the experiment that is my ongoing project there. And it flared out because it was a synthetic looking type silk, and the only way I could get them so they didn't like drive me crazy was having a tie back. And actually I really like the way that looked, because that's a slightly more formal room, and I like that blend of classic and contemporary. So if you've got a problem with your curtains where they're just puffing out, you can do a tie back, and they don't have to be old fashioned. A problem that we see quite often, and we've been asked about a lot of times, is what to do when on one wall you have different types of windows. So you might have a French door and then a small window, and they're in close proximity to each other. Yeah. What would you do in that scenario?
Ooh, a good example behind is above the dressing table, it was a smallish sash window, but then to the right of it was large French doors with also the side windows too. So we really just wanted to make everything look the same, or so they hadn't fallen out with each other. We wanted to look like it was all cohesive. So we basically just almost treated the windows as if it's the same as the French doors. We put the shears all the way across, so you kind of lost the boundaries of the shape of the window.
It's almost like a whole curtain wall then.
It was. It was. And the other thing you could do, say if it's you don't have the option of curtains, but you've got two windows that are different heights, different sizes, or what have you. That's when you can get clever with a Roman blind. You can maybe go higher with one blind than the other blind, but treat them the same height. Yeah. But then get them made so they drop the same. You can really play around with options these days.
Yeah. And one of the questions that I saw, I just briefly looked at it, we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute because you've got a busy day, I know, is what height do you take your Roman blind to? Do you take it just to the sill or below?
I would say below. It depends. You might have a nice windowsill, but then also light bleed too if you go above. you're going to get that
wants to be
light
at least
come through.
touching it, doesn't it?
You
And it
do.
also depends, like with your windowsill, if it projects quite a lot, then
Yeah.
just hit the windowsill, because otherwise it's going to force your curtain,
You
your
do.
blind out. But
Yeah.
well, thank you so much, Brett. You survived. Window treatment masterclass
Well, thank
completed. I hope you guys have found that really helpful. I've really enjoyed doing this with you, I have to
too.
say. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, make us really happy. And you can also follow us on TikTok at Sophie Paterson Interiors and Instagram at Sophie Paterson Interiors. You will see completely different content on all of those platforms. So don't think if you're on YouTube and you're watching us here that you've seen it all. There's so much more that you'll be missing if you're not on those platforms. Thank you guys, have a great day, and we'll see you very soon.